So, yeah, um, this one's going to be a lot. So, Hazbin Hotel. At the time of my recording this, 6 episodes have been released. There are a few more left to go in the first season, but a great deal of the focus has very much been on episode 4. The episode in general has been driving a lot of the conversation from people who have seen it, both fans and distinctly non-fans. This has made a pretty big splash, and understandably so. It's very, very well put together for what it's doing. A little bit of context on the off chance you're watching this without having seen the show, just to be thorough. Hazbin Hotel is a show on Amazon Prime, and it is set literally in hell. It is a hell that basically is kind of like Earth but worse. Like, people still need to have jobs, and you don't just sit around getting tortured all day, and you can't actually get killed in hell. Presumably you just cease to exist altogether at that point, but it's occupied by demons and sinners and all that sort of stuff. It's weird because if you've heard of Hell of a Boss is technically a spinoff of this, even though Hell of a Boss has been doing proper episodes on it. Hazbin Hotel had a pilot episode back in 2019. That hit very well. It started getting developed into a proper series, but while that was in development, the people who made it started the spinoff, Hell of a Boss, releasing those episodes directly onto YouTube independently. And so the spinoff show has had 2 seasons, or it's still in its 2nd season. There isn't a set schedule on the release date on those. Even before the first proper episode of the main show it technically spun off from came out. Streaming, it's weird. But this deals with a lot of characters who are varying degrees of despicable. There is the token good-hearted person. In the case of this show, that is Charlie. There is Charlie's girlfriend, Vaggie, who is certainly well-meaning, but clearly it has a bit more edge to her than Charlie does. Charlie's goal in opening the so-called Hazbin Hotel is to give sinners a path to redemption. Come here, check in, and we will work with you to try and make you better so that you can redeem yourself and be worthy of heaven. She has actually not gotten heaven to agree to this yet, but she's starting the ball rolling all the same. And yes, it is in many ways, at least on paper, kind of an equivalent to the show The Good Place, except tonally it's very, very different. And also they say a lot, but the core idea, not a million miles away. Now, there's the usual ragtag ensemble of characters in this. I'm personally rather fond of Husk. I was always going to be biased in his favor. He's voiced by Keith David. I find Alistair to be very intriguing. He's an archetype that I like in general, which is the person who appears to be an ally, but also is very much doing his own thing for his own reasons. So despite being very powerful, he is unreliable. But episode 4, which is the one that got the big attention and the one that I'm going to be focusing on, that puts the spotlight onto the character of Angel Dust. Angel Dust is a porn star. And no, I don't mean Angel Dust was a porn star in life before he died, however he died, and then he came to hell. No, I mean he's a porn star in hell. That's what he's doing with his time in hell, making porn. So he gets a highlight here, and up to this point, he's been an enjoyable but bit of a one-dimensional character. He's just aggressively horny all the time, and if there's a chance to make a sex joke or a sex pun or to come on to somebody, he's going to do that. That's just kind of been his thing. This is the episode that gives us more details, gives us background, gives us a sense of his inner life, of how unhappy he is, and gives us at least some hints as to how he got into the current situation that he's in, and how much he desperately wants to not be doing what he's doing, but he does not have control, he does not have agency, he does not have choice. It is humanizing to what had previously been, as I said, a borderline one-note character. It is powerful, especially the song Poison that Angel sings. It does an extremely good job executing what it's trying to do. The problem is that what it's trying to do is a perfect example of the very limited ways in which sex workers are allowed humanity in our entertainment, which is show them having trauma and having been coerced. And again, I want to emphasize, this tells the story that it's telling incredibly well. And in a world where this is just one of many different ways in which sex workers get characterized in our entertainment, I would have no complaints about this. This is excellent. The problem is the narrative that it's spinning is basically the only narrative that is used to grant sex workers any sense of humanity. Now, to be fair, that is still better than what used to be the standard. What did the standard used to be? Well, you look at the acting resumes of literally about the last 50 years or so of aspiring starlets, you're going to see the role dead hooker a lot. So giving any degree of humanization, any degree of background, any degree of depth at all is a better place than things used to be, where sex workers were present for some kind of aesthetic reason, usually to make a place seem sleazy, or where there was a punchline, or were there to be dead. Police procedurals love a dead sex worker. So before I get too far into why this being the prevalent way in which sex workers get humanized is a problem, I should be upfront about my own perspective on this. So, hi, my name is Vera and I'm a sex worker. I'm not sure if I've said that completely plainly on this channel yet. And to be clear, I don't mean I'm a sex worker in the sense of, oh, I perform and host burlesque, which I've been open about for a long time. And, even though I like to think of it as artistic and all these other things, I am ultimately on stage taking my clothes off. That is basically sex work. No, I mean, I do what Angel does. I've been doing that for over 2 years now. And yes, there are sites that you can go and find that if that's what you want to do, but I'm not using this as a promotional tool. And it's the sites you're probably thinking of. Go have fun, but that's not the conversation we're having now. But I do feel it is important for me to make clear that I'm not speaking from a position of ignorance on this. I'm not speaking from a position of presuming what it's like to engage in creating porn. I'm speaking from experience. So the other thing that I will mention is that while I know my experience in engaging in this kind of sex work is by no means the definitive experience, I am also friends with a lot of other people who do similar work. Some of them do it part-time. Some of them have actually made it their full-time job. So if you want a little bit more of a view of the kinds of people that I've talked to, there's a video that I did over on one of my other channels where I actually talk to, well, I speak myself, but also talk to 5 other creators who make use of that site that is only for fans. And they discuss their interests, how they got into it, and what their experience was doing it. You'll see, even within that small group of people, a variety of experiences. But my pool of friends that I know who do this and I've talked to about doing this is a lot bigger than is just in that video, but that will give you at least an idea. So what is the issue with the way in which Angel Dust gets humanized? Because again, he is granted depth and humanity through showing his trauma, the abuse that he suffers, and the ways in which he is coerced into the work that he does. Now, we don't know if coercion was involved when he first started getting involved in making porn, or if he always had an interest in this and just ended up getting into the situation he's in. He has a contract under a demon named Valentino, and that situation specifically is very abusive. We don't know which is the case. Given the general characterization of Angel Dust, I would be inclined to think he probably always had a pull towards making this kind of stuff, but that just led him into a situation where he is now, for all intents and purposes, a sexual slave. This is the predominant way in which sex workers are granted some kind of humanity, depth, or background to show why they do this. And the answer is one of two, if not both things. They have a lot of damage and a lot of trauma, often in the form of abuse in youth. That's not necessarily the case with Angel. We don't know at this point. And or they were coerced into it, either completely from the beginning, or they were pushed further than they would have gone by people who harm and control them in these kinds of abusive relationships. And that is not only narrow-minded in terms of being basically the only way that sex workers get humanized in these kinds of works or any kind of Western entertainment. And I'm going to emphasize Western. I am speaking on my experience of living in the United States and taking United States media and seeing how sex workers are treated in media for over 40 years now. Well, no, not quite that long. I'm not sure how old I would have been the first time I saw a sex worker in a movie or a TV show and knew that's what they were. I don't know, early teens. So let's say 30 years I've been seeing this. And while I don't want to pick on Hazbin Hotel, because again, it's very good, but it does exemplify the issue. I've actually been thinking about talking about this, the depictions of sex workers in general, for a while. But this basically gave me something that is kind of in the conversation in the zeitgeist right now that allows me to point to it and go, that is basically what is going on. And now I get to explain why that's a problem. So, first thing, I was not coerced into doing sex work. I chose to do it because it was something I had a natural draw to. That is the case with some, though not all, sex workers. For some, it's just a job. Like any job, you come in, you do the work, you get paid, you go home. It's not your life. It's not what eats everything of your time or your mind. It's just the thing you do to pay your bills. And some people engage with it. While they may be very good performers, some people honestly engage with it about the same as you would the office job. You clock in, you do the work, you make sure that the people who need to be happy with your work are happy with your work, you go home. And that is a valid experience of doing this kind of work. I don't want to pretend that the kind of coercive and abusive situations that Angel is in don't happen. It would be deeply callous of me to pretend that such a thing has never or does not still in some situations happen. However, in my anecdotal, granted, experience in first world countries where pornography itself is not criminalized, this way of portraying pornographic sex work, of focusing on the coercion, the abuse, the pain, at best, that feels very out of date. And I'm going to zero in on Valentino to focus on how that's out of date. Because Valentino, while he is, within the context of the story, a pornographic movie director and talent manager, what he is coded as is a pimp. Both in terms of his behavior, his control of Angel, and also just the way he's dressed. It's stereotypical cartoon pimp. And let's not mince words, pimps are awful. Always. It actually will always be a bit of a thorn in my side, the fact that pimp came to be used kind of like as a compliment or something that guys would brag about, as if all it meant is some guy who gets a lot of women. It would be far more accurate to describe a pimp as someone who controls women.
Bender, honey, we love you.
Yeah, baby, I know it.
Without getting too much into the history of the issue, short version, the best case scenario with a pimp is a protection racket. The worst case is, well, this.
When I say you are 20 guys before lunch, you say...
Yes, Valentino.
Pimps are a staple of full-service sex work, aka prostitution. And pimps kind of wormed their way into the system when a good deal of prostitution and trying to find clients was done on the street, which was dangerous. So pimps would claim to be protecting the girls when in truth they were coercing, abusing, and taking a cut of their money, if not the majority of it. The thing is, while it was true at previous points, previous decades, 70s, 80s, maybe even into the 90s, early 2000s at a stretch, there would have been an equivalent to pimps within the pornographic industry. Those being pornographic studio directors, owners, producers, etc. And they would have been in a position to similarly abuse and coerce work because they were the gatekeepers at getting access to the work. But that's not the world in which this kind of content is made anymore. Sites like the one that is only for fans and many others are controlled by the creators. Everybody's basically an independent contractor at this point. If you do work for a producer or a site, it's a one-off. You get booked for a gig. You're not under contract for them with some kind of exclusivity. If you don't want to work with them, you can go on your own. Might it be tougher? Maybe, but it is more viable now than it has ever been. So the fact that Hazbin Hotel, like many things, continues to depict a very old, out-of-date model, again, speaking within the United States and a first world and a Western perspective, this very outdated notion that the porn industry is controlled by these horrible porn producers. I will not say that has never been true. It has. That hasn't really been true in a long time, not as default at the very least. And again, I will emphatically say I am not saying this never happens at all under current circumstances. It just isn't what happens all the time. And in fact, at least in my experience and from my observations, it's a minority of times at this point. Now, you might find yourself thinking, so what? It's good drama. Like, what's the problem? Well, there's a few problems. If you hadn't noticed, sex workers are one of the things that the far right has been attacking for a while now. And one of the more sneaky ways in which they do that is to attempt to paint all sex work as abusive and coercive. They do this in one of two ways. The first is an attempt to tie all sex work, be it pornography, prostitution, or anything else, to human trafficking. Hey, it's Vera jumping in from the editing phase. I actually did a video a few years ago back when OnlyFans was on the verge of kicking off its adult content creators. And in that video, I went into detail on one of the religious right organizations that was causing that to be something they were considering. And while that particular organization, dubbed Exodus Cry, is far from the only one of its kind, it is indicative of the sort of thing that goes on. So you can check out that video for more detail on how they operate and what they are trying to accomplish. Now, human trafficking, again, is something I will not deny happens, and it is atrocious that it does. However, criminalizing and punishing people who engage with sex work does not help sex trafficking. This has been studied and confirmed by the people whose job it is to try and actually combat this kind of thing. When you force sex workers underground, you actually make it harder to deal with human trafficking, particularly sex trafficking. Because when sex workers can operate safely and openly, They have every reason to speak up, to call in the authorities when something is wrong. But if you drive them out of public view, if you try to criminalize what it is they do, they're not going to go to the cops when they think somebody's been trafficked, because they'll have to admit that the reason they know is because they themselves are a sex worker. I mean, fundamentally, the reason prostitution in specific is dangerous at all, virtually every reason for that ties into the fact that it is illegal. If it was not illegal and they could seek the help of the police, of authorities, if they could know that they were not going to be punished by the simple fact of how they make their money, they could report the people who abuse them and the stuff going on around them. But they can't. So I did bring up prostitution there, and primarily, again, to bring it back to the show, this is focusing on pornography. However, I don't think the comparison is completely out of whack because, as I said, Valentino is very much visually and attitude coded as a pimp. So coming back to what I was saying, attempting to tie all sex work into sex trafficking is one way in which the far-right conservatives or any sort of sex-negative people in general will try and condemn and control and get legislation pushed to restrict the rights of sex workers. The other way is to push the idea that nobody would ever do this job if they weren't being coerced. So by its nature, if someone's doing this job, something's wrong with them. Something horrible happened. They're damaged, they were tricked, they were hooked on drugs, and they were brought into this world, and now they're trapped. And it creates this myth that by cracking down on sex work, you are helping the sex workers, and you're not. You are punishing them. Demonstrably, that's what you're doing. But you build a narrative that says, this work, nobody would ever choose to do this. And that makes it easier to push the idea, well, if anybody is doing this, clearly something's gone wrong, and we have to act. We can't just leave them alone and let them be. And the depiction in something like Hazbin Hotel feeds into that, because Angel is abused, is coerced into more scenes than he would want to do, into specific kinds of scenes he may not have ever chosen voluntarily to do. And we see the damage that this has done to him.
I'm sick of the poison. Wish I had something to live for tomorrow.
And again, it comes across as very genuine and very heartfelt. But that's still the only way in which we ever get to see sex workers humanized at all, is this emphasis that we are all damaged and that we were all coerced by life circumstances, if not an abusive person, into doing this work. And neither of those is true. And framing that as the only way that we ever get depth added to us when depicted in media is harmful. Much like when I talked about the primary narrative for trans characters in media, I talked about this a little while ago, being focused on transition itself and often being focused on dysphoria and what led someone to transition means that you are framing the existence of trans people through pain. You are defining us by pain. And similarly, sex workers are defined by abuse and pain and addiction. All of which Angel Dust is going through.
If I end up broken, I won't be his favorite toy anymore. And maybe he'll let me go.
Or if, you know what, I can make a comparison to a far older video I did talking about depictions of cross-dressers in media. This was even before I had a full proper grasp of my own existence as a trans person. But what I pointed out in that video was that for a long stretch of time, a man putting on a dress was not only treated comedically, it was virtually always something that was forced by circumstance. They had to hide, they had to go undercover, they had, to just not be noticed, they had to blend in some kind, Ms. Doubtfire had to try and see his kids. Some outside circumstance forced that man into a dress, because no man would ever voluntarily put on a dress. Similarly with sex work. We are abused and traumatized and addicted to various substances that we need a fix on right now, because nobody would ever choose to do this work. I chose to do this work. I do this and I continue to do it, and I will do it for as long as I get some kind of fulfillment out of it. And yes, also financial compensation, sex work is work. I should get paid for it. But I didn't come to this because I had no other choice. I had a choice and I made it. But that doesn't get shown. The only character that I am aware of, and people have other examples, or at the very least from Western media. Again, there might be better examples in anime or other foreign territories, or I don't know. But the only American depiction that I can think of that didn't feed into this, that's from the last 40 years or so, was the 80s movie Trading Places. In that, Jamie Lee Curtis plays the character of Ophelia. And Ophelia says flatly,
I don't do drugs. I don't have a pimp.
she is treating it like any other job with a retirement plan.
I've saved 42 grand and it's in T-bills earning interest. I figure I got 3 more years on my back. I'll have enough to retire on.
She has a plan. Now, we don't necessarily know how she got into this line of work. That doesn't get confirmed one way or the other. We don't know if she chose this, if she was coerced into it. We know she's not on drugs now and she doesn't have a pimp now. Did she ever? We don't know. But at the very least, this depiction doesn't have those elements. It doesn't have those elements of trauma, of abuse, of coercion. It doesn't counteract them. It just doesn't put them on display. They may or may not be part of this character's history. We just don't know and aren't told because for the purposes of the story that she appears in, it actually doesn't really matter. Another note from the edit, I have heard positive things about the recent film Poor Thing, which is currently nominated for an Oscar, and its depiction of sex workers as not stigmatizing the characters, or at the very least, as highlighting some of the misogyny behind why they do get stigmatized. Unfortunately, I can't personally vouch for this film because I haven't seen it. I live in a rural area and it's not playing anywhere that is convenient to me. I hope to get around to it eventually, but I'll just throw that out there that maybe a good one has gotten some attention, but I'm not sure about that. I just kind of figured that if I didn't mention it, it would be brought up a lot in the comments. So yes, I'm aware. No, I haven't seen it yet. I will get to it when I can. The fact that that's about the best we can hope for, I mean, like, it's positive insofar as, like, she's a character you are meant to like, but even she is not intending to stay in this line of work. But again, to be fair, to the extent that all of us want to retire at some point. So yeah, she doesn't want to do this for the rest of her life. That is true of most of us, which is, let's pause for a minute and get onto that for a hot second. There is a particularly insidious version of the idea that anyone doing this is coerced by circumstances, if nothing else. There are people who will say, look, because they are making money, it cannot be proper consent because they are doing things that they wouldn't be doing if they weren't getting paid. Let's be very clear about something. That is a description of literally every job that is not something that you were passionate about before you started getting paid for it. Every office job, every physical labor job. Any job where if capitalism ended tomorrow and you didn't have bills to pay, you wouldn't voluntarily sit down and do what you're doing. That's the same thing. You're only doing it because you're being paid. That is true of sex work. That is true of 95% of all work. If we didn't have bills to pay, we wouldn't be doing this. That's not a condemnation of sex work. That's a condemnation of capitalism, which, cool, let's condemn capitalism, but don't twist it into being a reason to treat sex work as somehow lesser. And we know why it is, because people are prudish and get uppity about sex. It involves sex, therefore it must be bad and dirty and wrong. If it weren't for sex, you wouldn't be here, okay? Most likely. Shout out to the in vitro fertilization babies out there. But to bring it back to Hazbin Hotel, this narrative, while very well told within this episode, is virtually the only one that is used to humanize sex workers. And it is, unfortunately, the same narrative that is used to oppress and make life difficult for sex workers. The exact same story being told in Hazbin Hotel, a story of abuse and addiction and coercion, is the exact same story that is used by politicians, anti-sex advocates, and the far right to clamp down on sex work and to sweep sex workers out of public eye, if not out of public existence. The idea that this work is only performed by people with trauma and people who were tricked into it and people who have some kind of abusive pimp they have to answer to. And again, I'm not saying that this is not a narrative that doesn't have some basis of reality, but it was true of pornography in particular a lot more 20, 30, 40 years ago than it is right now. And it's a narrative that's being used to hurt sex workers. And I'm not just saying this out of self-interest. Like, while the financial gains that I have from that kind of thing are very, very helpful, and honestly, they help a lot. You need to understand, YouTube does not pay all my bills, doesn't even come close. Even with Patreon, that barely covers my bills. It gives me a little more wiggle room to do this other stuff. But if I stopped doing sex work tomorrow, I would be okay. Things would be tighter, things would be tougher, but I'd be okay. So I'm not even bringing all this up out of self-interest. But there are people for whom this is how they earn a living. This is what they do. And for some of them, it is something that they do because they are more comfortable doing that than they are working in an office, working in a warehouse. There's a lot of disabled sex workers, some with invisible disabilities, be it narcolepsy, be it high anxiety, be it any number of things, some with actual limitations on their ability to sit in an office chair for 8 hours or walk up and down a fulfillment warehouse. Sex work, particularly pornography, particularly independent pornography, which at this point is a lot, if not the majority of it that is out there, it can be something that someone would rather they didn't have to do. It can also be a refuge. Like so many things, it can be good, it can be bad. But it's always ever only portrayed as bad. And the people who do it as broken, as abused, as in crisis, as self-destructive.
I can handle myself.
Really? Because I just saw someone self-destructing.
That is a narrative that hurts sex workers. That is a narrative that is pushed to say, see how bad it is for anyone to get involved in this? We shouldn't let anybody do it. That's not a solution. That is control. That is forced control of people that they don't like. And that's the kind of thing that this kind of story gets weaponized as. And I know that the makers of Hazbin Hotel are not trying to contribute to this problem. I guarantee that. And they may or may not have had consultation with people with actual sex work experience. I don't know if they did. But even if they did, that won't change the fact that I feel this is still pushing a narrative that is currently being used to harm us. You can have something get signed off on by a member of a group and still have the final product be not a good thing for that group. I hope they consulted with some actual sex workers, but I don't know if they did. And I know that there will be some people out there, for as many times as I've said, I'm not trying to erase any actual harrowing experience any people have had, who are going to go, well, what about all these people and this, and like these people who were sex trafficked and these people who were coerced into it. Yes, they exist. But you don't help them by ruining the lives of thousands or millions of people who have not been trafficked, who have not been coerced. I can only speak from the experience that I have and the experiences that I've been witness to. And our experiences are not only not represented by stories like this, our experiences are minimized and harmed by stories like this. This was a very difficult video to make. And I really hope, that I have expressed myself in a way that makes it clear why, as good as this episode is, because it's good. It is powerful. It is empathetic. It's really well done. The songs are great.
But at least I know I'm not alone. Just like me.
That doesn't make it not part of a greater issue. That doesn't make it not contribute to something that's a problem. If you are pro-sex worker, which if you're in my regular audience, I hope you are. If you're not, you're probably not going to watch my stuff anymore now. But if you are pro-sex worker, if you believe sex work is work, the prevalence of this narrative should concern you. And this is not me saying you should boycott or send any angry stuff to any of the people involved in the show or like send them links to this video. No. This is not about Hazbin Hotel. Hazbin Hotel is something that happened to hit the zeitgeist that gives me the perfect opportunity to talk about this. But they mean no harm by this. Do not go out and start don't harass anybody for any reason. But like, I'm not stopping watching the show. I'm not boycotting the show. I'm going to still watch it. I've seen episode 5 and 6. I'm looking forward to more. I'm enjoying it. But I can enjoy something overall and still see part of what it does and go, that's a problem.
Understood?
Lovely.
It's not all or nothing. It's not a case of this is the best thing ever or it's the worst thing ever. No, this is a very fun show. I like it a lot. And it also did something that I really wish it hadn't. But I understand why it did. And again, if this was not the prevalent, if not exclusive, narrative that is used to humanize sex workers, I wouldn't be talking about it. But it is. If we're not a dead body in a morgue, and we're not a punchline, then we are a cautionary tale. We are someone who went down the wrong path, either on our own or were tricked down it by somebody. I know I said that we don't know if Angel Dust started doing this work because he wanted it and then just got into a contract that put him in an unhealthy and dangerous situation, or if he was tricked from the get-go. Maybe he was only into the drugs and then that led him into a situation like, you want me to keep giving you drugs? Start doing this for me. We don't know what the case is, but even if he always had a legitimate interest in doing this kind of work, not based on trauma, which, again, at time of speaking, we don't know either way. We might find out later. But even if that is the case, at best, that's making a slippery slope case. That is making a slippery slope situation where you're saying, ooh, don't even start with the sex industry. Don't even start making porn because it starts with, I'm just streaming. Hey, look at me. And then it ends in sexual slavery. Just look what happened to Angel Dust. It's reefer madness. It is the equivalent of going, sure, one little puff on marijuana now. Yeah, seems harmless. But just keep at it. You'll go out of your mind. The narrative of reefer madness is a punchline now because we recognize how absurd that was. And I hope that one day I can see this narrative of even dipping your toe in sex work will lead you down to a path of destruction, will also be treated with the same amount of scorn at some point in the future. But we're not there yet. I hope we will be one day. If you have made it to the end of this video, thank you. This was difficult to talk about. Not because I'm ashamed or embarrassed. I'm really not. But because it's something so frequently misunderstood. Partially because of how it gets depicted. And I'm not saying we need to start putting out things where people aspire to make porn. I mean, if someone wanted to try and tell that story, I'd actually be really, really keen to see it. But I'm not saying that's what we need. Just like I don't think we need a story where people aspire to be office manager. I think that's a pretty dehumanizing line of work. But we don't need to keep hammering on about how awful, how abused, how broken sex workers are. Not only are you not helping, you're contributing to a narrative actively being used to harm us. So, thank you for listening. If you want to support what I do, there are a bunch of ways to do it. Patreon's the big one. If you want to support me by going to any of the sites where my work in this other area is available, yeah, you can do that too. That's also helpful. You know, all the other stuff, like, share, subscribe. It's all good. Don't worry too much about it, though. What I really want you to remember, you are beautiful. You are valid. And you are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. Drum roll for my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Zubin Lafula, Goddess Elida, Oliver B., Turok, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Ruth, Gozer the Gozerian, Solitary Pictures, Ulrich Bogdan, Geek Filter, Melinda Walters, Toby Jackson, Jen, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Fernambi Likes the Poodle, Robin Powell, T Love, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Quite Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Pau Barabajoggle, and Mira G. Thanks so much.